was the light reactions. Step number 2 is going to be the light-independent reactions, otherwise known as the Calvin cycle. They're called light-independent reactions because it doesn't need to have sunlight hitting in order for these steps to happen. We need the parts from the light reaction, but we don't need sunlight for this step. This is Calvin cycle. The location of this is going to be, if we go back up to our chloroplast, the stroma. And the stroma is going to be this portion, it's like the cytoplasm you could think of the chloroplast. It's all of this area outside of the thylakoid, which is convenient because some of the parts that we're going to need here are coming from the light reactions which took place in the thylakoid. So our location is the stroma. Again, we're inside of a chloroplast doing this. Now, when we think about plants, we know that they need sunlight, they need water, and then they breathe in a different compound. We breathe in oxygen. Plants are going to end up breathing in, I don't know what color I want to use for that. They're going to end up breathing in carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is going to come into play in this step here. So we already know that we have our NAD, pH, and our ATP. Those energy carrying molecules, they came from step 1. And we have this CO2, and that's coming from the environment. And what's going to happen here is it's going to cycle through a bunch of steps. Essentially, the carbon dioxide is coming in, and really we're focused on that carbon portion of it. And it's coming in groups of 3. So 3 carbon dioxide enter in. And there's already some carbon molecules hanging out in here. These are just carbon molecules chilling around. And these carbon dioxide molecules enter, and they're going to get attached to these carbon dioxide molecules that are already here, and they are going to get rearranged a bunch of times as they cycle through this process. If you want to see further details about that, you can take a look at that more complicated diagram that we looked at in class. It shows you some of the names of them, how many carbons are in each one as it's moving through. It's a very complicated process, but you can think of it as carbons coming in and it's getting rearranged so that we can end up making a carbon-based molecule that will make our glucose or our sugar. The way in which they get rearranged is by using that energy. So that NADPH and that ATP, well, they're going to come in here, and our NADPH is going to release energy and turn into NADP+. Our ATP is going to come in here. It's going to start as ATP. It's going to release energy and turn into an ADP and a phosphate, okay? And in the process, that carbon gets rearranged. Eventually, what comes out of here is a molecule called G3P. G3P. And this is a half of a glucose. Now, we only get half a glucose out. That means we have to do this cycle 2 times to make a glucose. Okay, and that glucose is going to be the formula of C6H12O6. And this is a really important thing for us to end up making. The molecules leaving, or the outputs of this, are going to be our glucose. That's kind of the key portion of this. And then we'll also see that we end up with some of those energy carrying molecules, the NADP+, we get the ADP, the phosphates. These, I don't really think of them as outputs because they're just going to cycle back and head over to this portion and get used up again. Okay? So if we take a look at this overall idea of photosynthesis, we want to think about what are our reactants that come from the outside and what of our products that are either waste or the end result or the goal. We're going to use that to create an equation for ourselves. So if we come up here, we will remember that in step 1, we had sunlight and water were my reactants that I needed. And that for step 2, I needed carbon dioxide. Yes, I needed NADPH and ATP, but since those came from step 1, those aren't an overall reactant. Those are something that's being generated and reused within the process. So, in terms of my equation, I'm going to start this off as my reactants. These are the things that are reacting. This is what I start with, are going to be CO2, and actually I'm going to rearrange this. I'm going to do it as water, H2O, and CO2. And in order to balance this, it's going to be 6 H2O and 6 CO2. That's how many we're going to need in order to get a full glucose molecule out. You could include in here as well sunlight. The only thing with sunlight is that sunlight isn't really a molecule. That's why it doesn't often occur in the actual chemical equation. It is an energy. As a result of mixing these 6 waters and these 6 carbon dioxides with the sunlight and going through the process of photosynthesis, we're going to end up with some products. The products that we come up with are the C6H12O6, and then we got those 6 oxygens from step 1. Remember, this here is glucose, and that is the food that we have been talking about. So this is the main idea of what's going on in photosynthesis. We have a light reaction. In the light reaction, sunlight comes in, and water comes in. The water gets split, and we create these energy-carrying molecules that are headed to step 2 to power that Calvin cycle. The oxygen that's created just leaves as a waste product, a pretty important waste product for you and me. Then we get into step 2. Step 2 is our light-independent reaction, or the Calvin cycle. And we take those energy-carrying molecules from step 1, and we use that to power this circle